Welcome back, everyone, for another deep dive. You know you're here because you want to get informed quickly, but really thoroughly, and that's exactly what we're all about here.
That's right.
So today, we're diving into this YouTube video that you sent us called The Jonah Mystery with...
Apostle Philip Malalosi.
Yeah, him. Yeah, and it's from March 2nd, 2025.
Okay.
So the big thing here that we want to unpack is this whole idea that the speaker has about the story of Jonah in the Bible.
Right.
But specifically how he's looking at the city of Nineveh.
Okay.
And how its name is connected to fish.
Yeah.
And also how that's all tied to Jesus and his interactions with fishermen.
Interesting.
Yeah. So we're just working with the transcript from the video itself. So let's just jump right in, I guess. So right off the bat, the speaker goes right into the name Nineveh.
Yeah.
What's the first thing that he's saying about the name?
Well, what's interesting is that he claims that the name Nineveh, or sometimes he just says N, means house of fishes.
Oh.
And he gives a couple reasons why he thinks that. So first he says that, Nineveh was a city inhabited by fishermen.
Right.
And not just regular fishermen, but actually he says great fishermen.
Okay.
And then more importantly, I think, to his whole argument, he says that the people of Nineveh actually worshipped a god of the fish.
So that's a pretty big deal, right? I mean, he's kind of setting up this whole foundation with this idea of the name meaning house of fishes and then leading into this fish god thing.
Yeah, exactly. And I think it's interesting how he's using this interpretation of the name itself to kind of set up all these other points that he's going to make.
Right, yeah. So let's talk about this whole god of the fish thing a little bit more. This seems to be a really important part of his whole interpretation.
Right.
So can you maybe unpack that a little bit? Why is he saying that the people in Nineveh were worshiping this god of the fish?
Yeah, so his explanation is actually pretty simple.
Okay.
He says that the fishermen in Nineveh basically believed that if they worshipped this particular god who was connected to fish, they would be more successful at fishing.
So the logic is that if you show enough respect to this god of the fish, he's going to make sure that you catch a lot of fish.
Right.
And that the fish will come to their shores. So it's kind of this idea of you do this for me, I do this for you.
Right, like a give and take.
Exactly, a reciprocal relationship.
Okay.
And, a lot of ancient cultures had these kind of patron deities who were linked to certain jobs or resources.
Right.
And so he seems to be drawing on that to kind of explain why he thinks the people of Nineveh worshipped a fish god.
Right. Okay, so he's got this whole background set up now, right? You have this city that could be named after fish and fishermen, and they might have been worshiping this fish god.
Right.
So then he goes into Jesus and how Jesus interacted with all these different fishermen.
Right. How
does he connect those two parts of the story?
Well, if you think about the big picture that he's trying to paint, it's he sees Jesus coming in and interacting with these fishermen as him trying to correct something.
And the transcript really emphasizes that Jesus met his disciples while they were fishing over and over again.
Right.
He even asks, "Don't you wonder?" As if to say, this can't just be a coincidence.
Okay.
There's got to be some deeper meaning here. And he's tying it to their background and what they might have believed, with this whole fish god thing.
Right. So what is he saying Jesus was trying to correct specifically? What's the problem he's trying to fix here?
So he's suggesting that Jesus was trying to get these fishermen to change their core beliefs.
Okay.
Because they came from this culture where they might have been worshiping this fish god.
Right. Kind of like he thinks was happening in Nineveh.
Yeah, exactly. And this is where it gets really interesting because he connects this to that famous line from Jesus about becoming fishers of men.
Okay.
And he says that this whole idea is linked to the fact that when the fish swallowed Jonah, the fish essentially became the fish of men.
Whoa, hold on. That's a little out there, isn't it?
Yeah, it's pretty metaphorical. But he's saying that because Jonah was inside the fish, it changed what fish meant in the story.
So Jonah inside the fish is like a human fish or something?
Yeah, something like that. And then that somehow connects to the idea of fishers of men.
Okay. I kind of see where he's going with it.
Yeah.
So then how does he explain Jesus's miracles that involved fish? The big catch of fish and stuff. How does that fit into this whole thing about correcting the fish god worship?
So he sees these miracles as these really deliberate actions by Jesus to redirect the fishermen's attention away from this fish god they might have been worshiping.
Okay.
He talks specifically about that time when Jesus tells the disciples to cast their net into the deep even though they hadn't caught anything all night.
Right.
And he even suggests that maybe the disciples had already tried praying to their fish god for help, but it hadn't worked.
So then Jesus comes in and shows them a different kind of power.
Exactly.
Okay.
And he says that this miracle wasn't just about giving them food.
Right.
It was about showing them that Jesus had divine power.
It's like he's saying, this isn't just about getting fish. It's about showing them who's really in charge.
Exactly. He's making a direct contrast between this fish god they might have been relying on and Jesus.
So it's not just about providing food, it's about showing them where real abundance comes from.
Right.
Okay, and doesn't he compare this whole thing to another story from the Old Testament too? Like, to make this point even stronger.
Yes, he brings up that story about Elijah and the prophets of Baal.
Right up on that mountain.
Right on Mount Carmel. And in that story, God's power is shown when fire comes down from heaven.
Right, a big display of power.
Yeah, and he's saying that the miracle of the fishes is kind of like that.
Okay.
Like it's this big sign to the fishermen and really anyone who's watching that Jesus has more authority than anything else.
Even more than this fish god.
Right, he even says that the only reason the fish god couldn't give them fish was because Jesus was literally there in Nineveh.
Okay, so he's really drawing a line in the sand there.
Yeah, he's saying there's this direct conflict between these two spiritual powers.
Right. But it's important to remember that this is just his interpretation of all this, you know?
Of course.
Okay, so let's move on to something else. He talks about Peter going back to fishing after Jesus dies.
Right.
How does he fit that into his whole argument?
Well, he doesn't see Peter going back to fishing as just him going back to his old job.
Okay.
He thinks it might be more about Peter going back to his old way of life.
Like going back to how things were before Jesus?
Exactly, and maybe even going back to worshiping those old gods.
Okay.
He's saying that since Jesus isn't physically there anymore, and Jesus was the one who made the miraculous catch happen,
Right.
Peter might have felt like he had to go back to asking those old gods for help.
So it's like his faith was shaken a little bit.
Yeah, maybe he didn't fully understand everything. Yeah.
Okay, so then Jesus comes back, and there's another miracle with a huge catch of fish.
Right.
What's the point of that second miracle in the speaker's view?
He sees that second miracle as like a really powerful confirmation. It's like a reminder that God's power is still real and active even after Jesus died and came back to life.
Right.
And it's showing everyone that those old gods they used to believe in are actually powerless.
So it's like a reset button almost.
Yeah, and he points out that the disciples finally recognized Jesus after the second miracle.
Right.
Like they finally understand that the power they saw wasn't coming from any other god.
So if we look at everything the speaker is saying, it seems like the fish aren't even the main point.
Right.
He keeps saying that it's all about who or what you worship.
Absolutely. He says it straight up. The issue there, it is not just about the fishes, but the issue there is about what they worshipped.
Yeah, he's using these fish and the whole idea of fishing as a way to talk about true worship.
Exactly. So all these miracles aren't just about providing food, they're about revealing who or what you should really have faith in.
It's like he's drawing this line between what he sees as the wrong way to worship and the right way to worship Jesus Christ.
Right.
And this all leads up to a call to action for the people listening. Like, what does he want them to do with all of this?
He wants them to realize that Jesus' miracles are proof that there's a greater power at work in the world.
Okay.
And he's telling people to follow God's lead, to move with his power, and to stop focusing on what he calls human agendas.
So instead of trying to do things our own way, he wants us to tap into God's power.
Exactly.
And he's saying that now is like a super important time for God's power to be shown in the world.
Right.
And he's calling on anyone who's willing to listen to God to join this movement and embrace this greater power.
Yeah, he's really passionate about it.
So basically, this whole deep dive has shown us this guy's interpretation of the Jonah story.
Right.
He thinks that Nineveh might mean house of fishes, and that the people there worshiped a fish god to be good at fishing.
And he thinks that Jesus, meeting those fishermen and performing all those miracles with fish, was his way of correcting their worship and showing them that he's the one with the real power.
Right. And then he uses Peter going back to fishing and that second miracle to really drive home that point about true worship.
And in the end, he's asking everyone to see this greater power that Jesus has and to align themselves with it.
Yeah, it's a pretty interesting take on the whole thing.
It is. And he does a good job of connecting those different parts of the Bible, Jonah, Jesus, Peter, all together.
Right, he's taking something familiar and looking at it in a new way.
Exactly.
So this definitely leaves us with some things to think about.
For sure.
What are those things we rely on in our own lives? Like, what are those powers we trust in, whether we see them or not?
Mm-hmm.
And if there really is this greater reality like he's talking about, do we need to rethink those things we're relying on?
That's a really good question.
It definitely gives us all something to chew on.
It does.
Thanks for joining us for another deep dive.
See you next time.